Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so today I am bringing you my look at budget decks to play after the rotation. So this is the news that the rotation is coming in soon, and XY, Flash, Fire, Furious Fist, and Phantom Forces will no longer be legal for tournament play, or at least standard format tournament play, in the Pokemon trading card game. That means out with all the old decks, in with some new. In my previous video, I showed you the decks which I thought were going to be the best decks. Some of them were a little bit expensive. A whole bunch of lovely people have said, hey Ross, can you show us some cheaper decks to play after the rotation for people that are newer to the game or not wanting to spend a bit of money? And you know what? My answer is yes. Yes, I can. Now, one major caveat before we start, SHAYMIN EX. This is the best setup card we have had since Uxie and Claydol rotated out. You play it on your bench, you draw until you've got 6 cards in your hand. Let's be clear, for almost every deck, and there is one notable exception that we'll go through in a moment, you are going to need SHAYMIN EX. So I'm going to take you through some cheaper decks, but the reality is you need really a minimum of 2 to 3 SHAYMIN EX to play most decks in this format. Take something like Rayquaza, where you really need 4 SHAYMIN and you need the Rayquazas and you need the Megas. That's a very expensive deck. Some of the ones I'm going through here with 2 SHAYMIN are significantly cheaper, but let's have it out there right at the beginning. You need SHAYMIN EX for almost every deck in this format, and the reality is that nowadays, if you want to play the Pokemon trading card game, you're going to need a couple of SHAYMIN. So let's start off with a completely new deck, Volcanion. And by the way, as I go through, I will be showing you not only why the decks are good, but I'll be explaining why they're slightly cheaper, and the same caveat as in my previous video. I don't know what people are going to play after the rotation. I don't know what new cards are going to be released after Steam Siege, etc, etc, so do bear that in mind. If nothing else, this should be an excellent starting point. So starting off with Volcanion. Now coming in Steam Siege, we are getting 2 Volcanions, and they are both looking pretty gosh darn good. Now let's start off with the non-EX Volcanion. First of all, it's just a rare in the set. Second of all, it was given out as a pre-release promo, although only 1 in 4 of the pre-release promos was this, so if you go to a pre-release, cross your fingers to get this. It's by far the best one. And it is the main Pokemon in a theme deck, which means you can buy the theme deck and guarantee yourself 2 of these Volcanions. This card is never going to get very expensive because it's too readily available. 1 fire energy, 20 damage, choose 2 of your bench Pokemon, attach a fire from your discard pile to each of them. That's pretty gosh darn nice. Not only does it do, 20 damage, which is fine, but it allows you to attach extra energy, which builds up very nicely indeed. Think of it like a Dark-type Evil Towel, but better. 100 damage for free energy seems expensive, but remember, his first attack is going to really help with getting him up and rolling nice and quickly. We're also going to need Volcanion EX in this deck, but we are getting some tins released in October. One of them is going to have Volcanion EX in. That means that it is going to be released as a promo. And all these EXs that get released as promos never get too expensive, because you can buy a tin for about, 12 quid in the UK, 16 bucks in the US, and you'll get 4 packs and the promo. Or if you're in Italy, you get 3 packs. Sorry, Italy. Now, the attack is fine, 130 for free energy is fine, but it's the ability Steam Up that we really like. Discard a fire energy from your hand, and then your basic fire Pokemon do 30 more damage. That means that Volcanion, the regular, does 50 damage and attaches 2 energy if you discard. But of course Volcanion stacks, so you can have 4 Volcanion EX out, you can use a Steam Up ability 4 times, and then that Power Heater actually does 140 damage and attaches 2 energy to the bench. Whack a Fighting Fury Bat on there, it actually does 150 damage. Play a Giovanni Scheme as your supporter for the turn, you can be doing 170 damage while accelerating energy on a non-EX. That's amazing. For a single energy, essentially. We've got Fisherman, so you can get all 4 energy back in your hand to go ahead and use Steam Up. It's really nice. Now, we wish we had Battle Compressor to discard all the energy. We don't, but it's not the end of the world. Now, this isn't a deck that you would necessarily just play these. If you're feeling lucky, one fun card to play might be the Torchic from PRimal Clash. It's got a Mega Barrage, you can attack twice. Now, firstly, you can use Flare bonus to discard a Fire Energy and draw 2 cards. That's quite nice. You can also do that exact same thing if you wish to use the Stadium Scorched Earth, which can be, quite frankly, quite useful. It was reprinted in Fates Collide recently. But you can also use the attack, and the attack, 20 damage if you flip a heads. Now, if you are feeling really lucky, you can use Steam Up 4 times, then you're doing 140, and you get a chance to do it twice. Now, it's Tails, it hits nothing, but if you're feeling lucky, Steam Up and Torchic could be quite fun. Another Pokemon that could be used nicely in this deck is Flareon EX. Now, this came out in a Generation set. The ability Flash Fire allows you to move a fire energy from one of your Pokemon to Flareon. So you accelerate the energy with Volcanion, move it on to Flareon using the ability. Blaze Ball, 50 damage plus 20 more for each fire energy. Between Flash Fire and Volcanion, you can just attach one energy to Flareon using his first attack, and then the next turn you can go ahead and use Flash Fire to attach that second energy. So you can essentially be attaching 3 energy per turn to Flareon. 1 using Volcanion's attack, 1 using Flareon's ability, and 1 just as your energy for the turn. That can build up pretty quickly. As with all of these decks, I can't guarantee what other Pokemon are going to come out in the future. I cannot guarantee exactly what's going to be played with it, and I don't have the time to go through every single option. But hopefully you can see that with Volcanion EX coming out as a promo, the regular Volcanion being a pre-release promo, and being in a theme deck, this is looking pretty good and will not break the bank. Yeah, you'll need a couple of Shaymins, but it's not the end of the world. Want something else? How about a Vileplume deck? Now, Vileplume's a fun little Pokemon who seems like it's lost quite a lot of power. We'll get to that in a minute. But Vileplume just stops item cards being played by either person. What makes Vileplume particularly good is the Stadium Forest of Giant Plants, which allows you to evolve from Oddish right up to Vileplume on your very first turn of the game. And that's where this deck makes its money, because you go first, you get a Vileplume going on turn 1, and then your opponent does not have access to items at any point for the entire game. And that is going to be moderately frustrating for them. But you're going to need an attacker. Now, this did used to be paired with Vespiquen, and Vespiquen's still legal. Double Colourless Energy, 20 damage plus 10 for each Pokemon in your discard. 2 reasons why this is a lot worse than it used to be. Number 1, Karen might be coming out. We're not in Steam Siege, but in the set after Steam Siege, we expect it to be in our Evolution set. It's coming out at some point. As soon as Karen drops, Vespiquen becomes a lot worse. Karen forces both players to shuffle all the Pokemon from their discard into their deck, like an underpowered Lysander's trump card. The problem here, of course, is that if you have no Pokemon in your discard, Be Revenged does very, very little. Now, Karen's another one of those cards that may or may not see play, but even people who don't want to counter Vespiquen might play it just instead of, something like Sacred Ash, for instance. Bit of a problem. But there are other things we can play. Now, a card which I really liked the look of, and I'm not saying it's going to be great, Breakthrough Noctowl. Double Colourless Energy. Both players reveal their hands, 20 damage times the number of item cards in total. So you can play a very item-heavy list with a whole bunch of Trainer's Mail and Acrobike, so that you can get the turn 1... So you can get the turn 1 Vileplume straight away, and then you can go ahead and use Noctowl to just do decent damage. The big problem, of course, is Noctowl not being a grass Pokemon means you cannot get it going on the first turn. Although, quick shout out to Hoot Hoot with Proclaim the Night, 1 double colourless energy, and it means that your opponent can't play item cards just in case you miss the Vileplume, which is kind of cool. It also, you could use that, and then even if your opponent hit a Hex Maniac to turn off Vileplume, they still wouldn't be able to play item cards, which could be kind of fun. But another Pokemon which I really like with Vileplume, and Alex Hill played this at US Nationals. Zygarde EX. Landsrath, 20 damage for 1 energy, 40 if there's a stadium in play. And you can just build this up. Yeah, Fighting lost a lot of its help like Fighting Stadium with the rotation, but Zygarde still has 190 HP and can get going pretty quickly. And honestly, it's still a good card. It still does a bit of damage. If you are going ahead and using Zygarde, why don't you use something like Carbink? Carbink has Safeguard, which means that you can go ahead and block attacks from EX Pokemon. Oh, gee whiz, that sounds kind of nice. Could be quite useful, all effective attacks, in fact, including damage. But then you've got Carbink Break, which you can, evolve Carbink into Carbink Break, and then for a single energy, you can then start attaching 2 energy cards from your discard pile to fighting Pokemon. I.e., you use Carbink to set up your Zygarde on the bench. Zygarde is weak to grass. That gives it a very, very bad matchup against Sceptile. But then, of course, Sceptile is quite nice in that it's an EX and Carbink can block it. And let's not forget Vileplume blocked off their trainers. Now, Vileplume is going to have 20 or 30 different, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Before it gets rotated out, this next format, Vileplume's probably going to have 20 or 30 different partners people are going to use. I'm not saying Noctowl's going to be amazing. Honestly, I think Carbink Zygarde is probably a better bet in the short term. I am saying that having this combination of Vileplume and Forest of Giant Plants for turn 1 perpetual trainer lock is just too good to turn down. Although, quick point of pedantry, and I'm a big fan of pedantry, as anyone who listens regularly will know, I should have been saying item lock, not trainer lock. Trainer lock is what the Undaunted Vileplume used to do, but we've since changed our terminology and it is now item lock. There we go. Now I feel a little bit better about that. As for why the deck is cheap, we've got Vileplume, who of course is just a general rare, and then of course, even if you want to play something like Zygarde, Zygarde is going to be, well, it has already been released, I should say, as a tin promo, and like I said with Volcanion, when it's released as a tin promo, the value never gets ridiculously high, so we're looking alright on that front. Life is good. Yay! Still going to need a couple SHAYMIN, unfortunately. But if you want a deck with 0 SHAYMIN, how about PRimal Groudon? Now, you're still going to have to buy the PRimal Groudons, that's a pain. But Groudon EX was released as a tin promo, and as I keep saying, that will keep the value down. And you do not play any SHAYMIN whatsoever. One of the reasons is you want to play Wobbuffet. Now, this was reprinted in Generation, so it's still going to be legal, and this is your ideal starter. When Wobbuffet's in the active, no non-psychic Pokemon can use their abilities, which means that no player can use SHAYMIN. You don't play SHAYMIN, your opponent can't play SHAYMIN. And I talked in my previous video about how Rayquaza's looking really, really nice right about now. Well, Rayquaza really relies on SHAYMIN, so if you can start Wobbuffet, that is going to really slow the Rayquaza player down, and that's pretty nice, quite frankly. I like that. Now, in terms of PRimal Groudon, he's got 1 attack, and it is an absolute doozy. By the way, there is an Ancient Origins PRimal Groudon. It's terrible, don't play it. We've got Omega Barrier, which means cards like Lysander, for instance, will not affect PRimal Groudon. There we go. Any trainer card other than Tools and Stadiums do not have an effect on PRimal Groudon. As a ruling point, if your opponent tries to play a Lysander, then the Lysander is still played, they still use their supporter for the turn, it just doesn't do anything. 200 damage if you've got a stadium in play sounds pretty good to me, and although Fighting lost a lot of its support in the rotation, it didn't lose strong energy, which means you put 2 strong energy on this bad boy, and now you're doing 240 damage, and that's enough to KO Mega EXs in a single hit. You set up behind Wobbuffet, you smash with Groudon. Now again, this is another deck where I would consider using Carbink Break, and as another little ruling point, Carbink Break says you can attach energy to your bench Pokemon, it does not say basic. So you can actually attach 2 strong energy from your discard to PRimal Groudon using Carbink Break in 1 attack. That sounds quite nice to me. Now, Groudon is not maybe the best deck ever. It's a little bit slow, it's weak to grass, blah, 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 blah. It lost Focus Sash in the rotation. That's not ideal. Let's ignore all of that for the time being, because it doesn't need any SHAYMIN, which makes it an awful lot cheaper. And it can one-hit KO anything, and it can set up behind things like Wobbuffet and Carbink with Safeguard. It's a deck which deserves a little bit of love. It's a deck that's going to see a little bit of play, and the only really expensive cards in the entire deck are those PRimal Groudon. You could, although I wouldn't recommend it, you could play with as few as 2. Really, I think you need 3 or 4, but you could play with as few as 2. And that makes it quite a lot cheaper. Now, the last 2 decks I'm going to tell you about in this video are decks with an awful lot of options. So I'm going to introduce you to the concept. You'll have to figure the rest out yourself. The other thing we're talking about here is 2 decks which, first of all, yeah, they're going to need some SHAYMIN. Sorry about that. But you can pretty much play both of them without EXs, using just regular rares, and that is going to bring the cost down a lot. First of all, Rainbow Road, named after the old Mario Kart track, or tracks I should say. There's one in every game. It revolves around the Breakthrough Xerneas, who for a fairy and a double colourless does 10 damage plus 30 more for each type of Pokemon on your bench. Why does that deserve noting now when it's been technically viable for, since Breakthrough came out? Dual type Pokemon. We've got a Grass and Dark Shiftry, we have got a Metal and Fighting Steelix, we are getting a Grass and Fire Volcarona, we are getting a Dark and Steel Bishop, we're getting a Fairy and Water Azumarill, we are getting a Fairy and Psychic Mega Gardevoir, and we are getting a Fire and Water Volcanion. Now, only one of those is actually a basic, that's Volcanion. He's coming as a tin promo, remember? All the rest are stage 1s or Mega EXs, except for Shiftry, who's a stage 2. So it's going to take you a little bit of time to set up. The point is, let's say you've got a Xerneas and you've only got an Azumarill on your bench. Well, you're doing 70 damage because that's 2 different types. You've got Fairy and you've got Water. Let's say you've got an Azumarill and you've got a Volcarona on the bench. Well, now you're doing 130. 4 different types is 120 plus the 10 base is 130. Then you can just add something like, a Bishop, because that's another 2 different types. Now all of a sudden in 3 Pokemon you've got 6 different types on the bench. Dark and Steel with Bishop, Grass and Fire with Volcarona, Fairy and Water with Azumarill. So that's 6 different types. That's 180. Plus the 10 base is 190 for free energy on a non-EX. That is what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. This is why the deck becomes good. And as that isn't good enough, all these cards are all coming out in Steam Siege. We're also getting Xerneas Break, which for 2 fairy energy does 20 damage times all the energy on the field. And let's not forget, you can also play the Geomancy Xerneas, which is also being reprinted in Steam Siege, which will allow you to put 2 fairy energy on the bench to get you started. Now, there's a bit of setup involved in this deck, but as soon as you're going, you can be hitting crazy damage with very, very few, if any, EXs in play. Now, you need all the stage 1s on the bench, you need the Fairy and the double colourless, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I know, but there is a lot of potential here. Add in the fact that Rainbow Energy is still in the format, and you can literally play any card you like in this deck. And to finish off, I want to have a very quick word about a deck that I'm going to call Stage 1s. Although you're going to play some basics in there as well. Sorry about that. And this deck is a deck that it's basically a counter deck. It comes around every so often. But basically, you just play whatever you feel like. I'll give you an example. You play Raichu. It's a stage 1. It's a lightning type. You can attack for a double colourless energy. Oh, you can, play Xerneas in there. Well, now you've got a fairy type, and Xerneas Break, of course, as I just said, does a whole bunch of damage quickly. Or you can play an Yveltal if you want a dark Pokemon, who also accelerates energy. Or that Volcanion I said about as a fire type, which also accelerates energy. You can put a Garbodor line in there, it's a stage 1, and you can make sure that your opponent doesn't have abilities for the remainder of the game. You could even put something like a Vespiquen in there just as a grass attacker, just so that you can go ahead and hit for a decent amount of damage with a grass Pokemon, as long as nobody plays a Karen. You could go ahead and play a Lucario in this deck. Now, this is the recently released Lucario from Fates Collide, just as a kind of end-of-the-game Pokemon. For a colourless and a metal, you get to do 30 damage plus 60 for each Pokemon fewer than your opponent that you have in play. That sounds quite handy to me. And you could also use Captivating Pokepuff. This is a new card which is coming out in Steam Siege. All you do there is grab basic Pokemon from your opponent's hand, as many as you like, and put them onto your opponent's bench. Oh yes. That also means that you could play something like Skyfield to put them up to 8 bench Pokemon, bench a whole bunch of basics, and really do some damage with Lucario. Another stage 1, which can also attack for a double colourless energy, and also can take advantage of Captivating Pokepuff. Have you guessed him yet? It's Zoroark from Breakthrough. 30 damage plus, 10, plus 30 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So you can do a very similar thing here to Lucario, except you don't have to limit your own bench to help the effectiveness. Now, this stage 1 deck, really, I don't even know, I'd have a clue what it's going to look like. But those are some examples, and you'll notice that most of them use just double colourless energy or one of their own type, so you really could play a mixture here. You could even maybe try playing rainbow energy if you were feeling a little bit fanciful. I can't give you too much more information because this deck is going to change and evolve as the format goes along. Once again, you'll need a couple of SHAYMIN in this deck, but we're just talking about a whole bunch of rares, and rares are not as expensive as EXs, as you may have guessed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will do it for this video. 22 minutes seems like enough for me. There is a comment section. What decks do you think are going to be good after the rotation? What decks do you think are going to be cheap and viable after the rotation? If I missed a whole bunch of decks, let's do another video. Why not? Use the comment section. There's a like button, click it, I'll be your friend. There's a subscribe button, click it, I'll be your friend. If you've already clicked it, find a friend, subscribe on your behalf, and I'll be their friend as well. That's right. There's a lot of love to go around. And of course, the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.